Hello everyone, this is Yalda from Eat, Burn, Sleep, the online low inflammation, gut health and sustained weight loss platform. If you follow me on my social media, you probably know that I love learning, discovering new things, meeting passionate individuals. So I have decided to launch this podcast where I interview amazing people. We're going to be talking about physical health, mental health, well-being, with people who are passionate about what they do and who strive for excellence. I hope you learn from it and you enjoy it. Let's get started. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Eat, Burn, Sleep podcast. Today I have a fascinating guest, Nick Potter, who's an osteopath based in London. I have known Nick many years and I'm so excited to have him with us today to talk about why women feel more pain. This is a podcast that's going to appeal to many women, but for men as well, so you can support the women around you. Nick, thank you so much for being with us. How are you?
My absolute pleasure. It's a delight to be here. And hopefully it's an interesting subject to talk about. Hopefully it won't upset too many people, but we'll get to the bottom of it and keep it quite simple. But no, it's lovely to be joining you here and to be sharing this podcast with you.
Nick, give us a little bit of background. So I have met you the first time in 2007
That's
as
right.
your patient during my first pregnancy. And I have seen numerous osteopaths around the world since. And to me, you're definitely the best.
That's very kind. Thank you.
You're incredibly intense,
Yeah.
incredibly intense, incredibly intelligent, and absolutely passionate about what you do. How did you start having this passion for the human body?
I was always set really from the path of my family, really, where there's a long line of doctors and medics to do something medical. And I pretty much had my nose glued to the television about 10, looking at sort of brain surgery and things. I just was always fascinated by people. I was also very lucky to have a mother, actually, who was very people orientated and was very observant and taught us to notice things. And I think that personally, it may sound rather strange, but I just don't think there's anything more fascinating than people. And looking at them, trying to have a almost detective's hat on when you're trying to work out what's going on. Sometimes it's about what they're telling you, but also what they're not saying, what they think you need to know, what you don't need to know, and just picking up little cues that give you insight into where they're going in their journey, their story, and why they've come to see you with their symptoms at that time. My own personal story was sadly, I was very lucky to go to a private public school, and I was a very keen rugby player. Ended up playing elite rugby and went out to New Zealand, and unfortunately broke my back. And I ended up not taking the traditional medical path, but actually because I was treated so fantastically by two osteopaths, actually one very ancient guy here who's 95 when he saw his last patient, and a couple of guys in New Zealand. I just thought this was the path I wanted to follow. So I trained in the UK, but also did some training in osteopathic medicine in Chicago. But then I thought that kind of wasn't enough. And then I went and did rehab medicine in Germany. I was involved in the Australian Olympics. And I'd also always split my time between performance medicine, i.e. how we look at athletes, how they're in the environments and how they tick, and then extrapolating that into how it made people tick. And I currently now work at the King Edward VII Hospital in London, where I treat mainly complex pain syndromes, head, neck and facial pain particularly, so headaches, migraine, TMJ, jaw problems. And then I weirdly work in a hedge fund in London where I have been sort of in charge of health, running them a bit like a team manager, but also looking at, again, I studied into why testosterone actually causes decision-making changes in traders, and showed this to the guy who owned the company, and he was fascinated, and 11 years later I'm still there. But I love the job, and it involves a lot of very intense people who are very on their game, who are very elite in what they do. I call them corporate athletes, that they're at the top of the game. And similarly, they suffer with very similar issues. Stress is the main one, and I spent really 25 years studying stress and what it is and why it exists, whether it's the neuroscience end or physically with patients in my clinic. And it's been fantastically liberating, really, to be able to help patients with much more when you understand how they tick much more, but also to be able to explain it to them in simple terms. And I think that's where hopefully I can be articulate around subjects so that and some of them are emotive, they'll promote responses in people. But if you can explain people and bring them with you on the journey rather than just telling them what to do all the time, you get a much better response. And I'm just very lucky to love what I do, really.
So by hearing Nick talk, you can imagine that every time that I come to see him from my back, we end up talking about so many things. And I love his intensity. Before we jump onto the fascinating topic that we're covering today, I would like to invite you to look up Nick's book called The Meaning of Pain. It's just as intense as he is, but fascinating. It's the kind of book where you read 5 pages and you put it down and you try and absorb all the fascinating things that he has been mentioning. So, Nick, our work is very, there are so many crosses between our work. We have so many conversations about the vagus nerve, about the gastrointestinal tract, about cortisol responses, inflammation, and how all of this is linked. Why do women feel more pain?
A really big question, and I will try and explain it as simply as possible. When I was writing my book, actually, once somebody asked me on the radio the other day what was the most important or interesting thing that I had learned, the fact I learned. Because when you do write a book, the first thing you have to do is research. And I ended up in a lot of very, very esoteric journals that nobody really reads. And it's very sad because there's a lot of really good stuff out there that nobody's linking or bringing in, and doctors can't read it all. Mm-hmm. So I went off into the neuroscience world particularly, but I've discovered an extraordinary fact, which is that only hollow organs feel pain. And I've put that to so many doctors, cancer specialists, neurologists, you name it. And they sort of pause and go, my God, that's right, isn't it? I hadn't thought of that. And it's very important because the reason that hollow organs are more pain sensitive is because they have contact with the outside world. So your gut and your bowel are a very good example. So from your mouth right down to the rectum, there's potential for the tract of the bowel to be invaded by bacteria, which is in some cases a good thing, but not always. So toxins, foreign bodies, or infection. And so the brain had to place an alarm system around those organs because it had to be alerted to the fact that something was wrong. And so if you look at, for example, you can't have liver pain. It doesn't really exist. You can't have pancreatic pain. And even kidney pain doesn't exist. It's actually the bladder, the urethra, everything that contacts with the outside world that's able to feel pain. And that's important for women because you have one more organ that us boys don't have, and that's a uterus. Yeah. And so around which is wrapped enormous importance for obvious reasons. Biology and nature wrapped a huge amount because it's the place where babies are made and born and incubated, if you like, to use a rather bland term. But as a result, we had to ask ourselves the question in chronic pain, why do 4 times as many women suffer with chronic pain as men? And it might be something that we don't, it tends to get buried because I think sometimes women think that it's going to come out there somehow more emotional, they're less capable, they have lower pain threshold, whatever, and it's none of that. And there are very good physiological reasons for why. And I think we had to put together a nice little package, if you like, to be able to explain. So the first is the fact that the body wraps importance around anything that's hollow, and you have one more organ than we do. But also attached to that is the meaning. The reason I called the book The Meaning of Pain was because pain escalates or decreases or changes its nature according to how your brain processes what the pain's about. Mm-hmm. So the nature, for example, I use my hands all day, and if I break a finger, it's catastrophic. If I break an ankle, it's not such a problem. But my brain will immediately go into overdrive with, oh dear, I broke my finger, I can't work, I can't see patients, I can't make money, I'm going to go into debt. So, you go down a rabbit hole of concerns, which is more anxiety than it is actually the pain itself. And the big question we had to ask was, why do people who've had acute pain, so they can break a bone, etc., after 6 weeks to 12 weeks, they'll be healed, but they're still feeling pain? And that's the big question. Why do people get chronic pain? Why do they just wake up every day with a pain in a limb, in the abdomen, or anywhere in the body, even headaches, migraine? They're just pain pathways. We call them headaches because they're in the head, or we call them backaches in the back, but the process is actually the same. And so in women, there are a whole set of modules, just like we have as men, but they're just slightly different. And the second most important reason, I think, is that women are more sensitive to what we call negative affect. So on the whole, women generally have a more caring module, if you like, inside them. Because it was there probably to care for children, because that's what defined their role on. We're going back to roaming the plains, so please don't get me wrong. This is not modern society necessarily, but the point is we're still programmed for that. And if you care more, you worry more, and if you worry more, you have more fear. And fear is actually at the heart of pain. Pain, believe it or not, is actually a fear response. So I think that and there are a number of other reasons, hormones play a large part. I have had some fascinating meetings recently about the role, in fact, of testosterone, not just estrogen and progesterone, which is still very rarely actually tested in women. They need testosterone just as much as we do for different reasons. But interestingly, there's quite a lot of neuroscience to suggest that women who are depleted in testosterone actually feel more pain. It sensitizes their nervous system through a very complex pathway. But the point is it does. So replacing it sometimes can create absolutely fundamentally dramatic responses. They also, from a physical point of view, ladies sadly postmenopausally tend to lose a lot of muscle mass. They very quickly lose it, which we think again is probably testosterone. But also they just don't have the same drive systems as we do men to keep muscle, particularly the glutes, as always out there, the ladies trying to constantly get their glutes back up for a pert bottom, and they are sadly they very quickly will waste if you don't lose them, and then that causes pain because of mechanical issues. But I think we're looking at just a different dynamic in women, particularly as they get a little bit older. We tend to see these things set in, and then a lot of it is their personal dynamic. If they're unhappy, then that escalates their pain.
So, Nick, you've said so many interesting things.
Sorry,
so I'm going to slow it down. So the first thing is hollow organs.
Yeah.
Feel more pain, survival mechanism. If something comes from the outside, we need to feel it. Women have one more organ that is hollow, which is the uterus. The second thing you've mentioned is the body repairing after 6 weeks.
Yeah.
6 weeks, which is a quarantine, which is a cycle. And that's why actually on my platform, there's a 6-week reset has been shown to be a period of healing, like postpartum is 6 weeks, that period. In my humble opinion, the reason why people continue feeling pain afterwards is probably due to inflammation. And I know that because I have broken an ankle. And I was told I was not going to get full mobility back. I have, a plate and 7 screws. And not only I got full mobility back, but also I do not feel pain, except I never felt pain post-surgery. People told me, if you break your ankle, when the weather changes, you'll feel something. Sometimes I only felt pain once. Is after 10 days of holidays of drinking every day and really inflaming my system. And suddenly my ankle, and I was in the Caribbean, was hurting me. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's because there's a link with inflammation.
I think you're right and partly wrong at the same time. I think the reason that after a partying week, I suspect you've been doing some dancing. I know you as do I. And when I'm afraid the old disco head comes on when I've had a few sherbets. But I think, so I think probably you were more active with the ankle too. But you're not wrong. The interesting thing is, and plates are a slightly different issue because plates can be an irritant to the surface of bone. So if you put a lot of stress through the bone, you can get pain. And sometimes we need to take the plates out. But I think in general terms, there won't be a direct inflammatory response in the old site of things because I think patients are often find it extraordinary when they see a fractured foot bone or something. I showed a lady the other day, and she went, "Oh my God, that's going to need a plate." I said, "No, it won't." I said, "The muscles will pull it back into line. And over time, over 6 weeks, you'll be amazed that bone will not only go back into line, but it will be fully healed." And so the reason the medical profession sets chronic pain as any pain that goes past 3 months is because we know we'll make allowances for the difficult fracture or the inflammation, etc., at 6 to 8 weeks. But then at 3 months, it really should be healed. So why is the patient still getting pain? And you're right that inflammation in the early stage of injury is massively important. But instead of seeing it as something negative, it's actually your healing system.
Absolutely.
It's dragging all the messengers and all the transmitters it needs to call all the other cells to come in.
But the chronic inflammation after, would that worsen?
I think if we're talking about a joint, then I think, which is different from inflammatory bowel pain, which I know you've been very key in helping with. I think what will tend to happen is that a pain pathway gets established to the brain. So believe it or not, all pain happens in the brain. And this is difficult for patients who say, no, my ankle's hurting. It's because your ankle, there are actually no pain pathways in the body, and it confuses people. Even doctors are still taught that certain drugs block pain fibers. There are no pain pathways in the body. They don't exist. There are no pain fibers. When you feel acute pain, if you stub your finger or you burn your finger, it is simply that the receptors for heat in your hand with respect to a burn have reached a level enough that the number of messages going to the brain are saying this is too hot, pull away. And the response is to reflex. Pain that maintains itself for more than 3 months is because your brain's got into the habit of pain. So you're actually fine. And very often when people are stressed, particularly if there's trauma, so for example, suppose you broke your ankle being mugged or you were run down by a car, a hit and run, and you had anger and a lot of emotion around the things. Very often, sometimes a smell, a sight, a sound, or a similar street in a similar place will remind you of the accident, and you will suddenly get pain in your leg. It's extraordinary. It will switch it back on.
Wow.
Because there's what we call a pain matrix. You remember injury particularly in a huge, it's as if your brain takes a flash photograph.
Wow.
So it remembers the name of the street. It remembers that there was a smell of bonfire in the background. There was an aftershave of the mugger that attacked you. So literally an aftershave can set off that pain immediately.
Wow,
and
that's
we hear
fascinating.
That, regularly. So there's an enormous amount of stuff wrapped around the pain that you've been suffering. So when it comes back, or if it doesn't go away, your brain's got locked into a belief mechanism that it needs to be worried about that limb or that part of the body and it needs to be told. So a lot of what I do is literally just fear avoidance. Sometimes it's just reassurance. It's like, no, you're not broken.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that your surgeon decided to show you an MRI and lay it all on that. But actually, if you looked at mine, it's a car crash and I don't have any pain. We over-rely on imaging.
Yes.
And imaging is very powerful to patients. Once they've seen a bulging disc, it's very difficult for them to get it out of their head.
Interesting.
And they'll very often say, should we do they're completely pain-free, but they'll say, should we do another one to check on the disc? It's like, what are we going to gain from that? And by the way, it might still be bulging.
So this is neuroplasticity. You create the pain with your head.
Absolutely. It's an experience. And that's what, if you look at the World Health Organization definition, it is actually described as an unpleasant experience, not a sensation, because it's wrapped up in a number of things. And if we look at trauma, the awful act of rape, for example, is a really good example of that, because the concept of being invaded, the concept, and obviously it has direct effects on the womb, etc. And that's the point. It's an invasion of a part of the body that's not only very important to you neurologically, but also emotionally. Yes. And it's a violation of your rights. It's a violation of you as a woman. It's a violation. So it's wrapped up in enormous amounts of anger and rage. And so they're very often the patients. I work with a lot of, sadly, rape victims who've had chronic pelvic pain. Yeah. And they don't know why the pain won't go away. And of course, they're no longer physically injured. The tissues are not torn or ripped or gone. This is sometimes years later. But what they've done is shut down effectively emotionally. They've put a sort of blank zone around the way that their brain perceives their lower half. They want to shut it off because it's too painful, not just physically, but also emotionally, to go there, re-engage it. That's why psychotherapy, that's why other therapies can be so useful in helping them go through it. And that's at the heart of PTSD, which we also see, the post-traumatic stress disorder. What we discovered is that it's a way that your brain, so the flashbacks, for example, a way of you remembering constantly how the thing that happened to you occurred. So classic is a soldier stepping on a landmine. They've believed that up until now they've had everything under control. They've gone out and checked, and they thought they were clear of mines, and then suddenly one day something took me out. And what the brain does is goes, how did that happen? Because next time it'll kill me. Mm-hmm. So the flashbacks are a constant reliving, but that's obviously tied up with the pain from the injury that they had in the leg. So the leg may well be healed, but because they never got over the surprise of not knowing that their environment was safe to them as when they thought that it was, then they're locked into a pain cycle. And so part of the training of PTSD is to discuss, go back through it, and they take them through a process, and it's extraordinary. The pain does just go away.
In a nutshell, women have more pain because we have more hollow organs, we have more hormones going through the body than men. Pain might increase, as you said, later on because our testosterone production drops post-menopause.
That's right.
And you said something really interesting, which is pain is actually created in the brain.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I always try and say to patients when they come and see me, I think there's a big fear that, particularly for women, I think they go around and very often see male practitioners who very often give off the intent that they think they're just neurotic females, and that's very unfair. And I think that what we've got to try and do is explain much better as to where we're coming from and why it works. And then suddenly people feel much more comfortable that way. So if patients come into me, I say to them very simply, it is not in your mind, it is not in your head, but it is in your brain. And you can see them pause. They go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that's fine. So if it's not in my mind and head, he doesn't think I'm loony. Okay, that's fair enough. And I said, because everything happens in the brain, doesn't it? And they go, yeah. And it controls everything, doesn't it? Yes. And all the feedback's done from there. So basically what pain is a fear response. That's what it is. And we know this because we had engrammed into our brains before history, literally. We know it happens as an embryo. These things, these modules are factored into our brain. We have a module for fear. And it was to keep us alive. It was to do all the things, to activate all the things that keep us safe. And that's all the nervous system wants. It just wants to be safe all the time, because without safety, it couldn't do anything else. It couldn't let you eat. You couldn't go and fodder for things to eat, to drink, etc. And also you couldn't make love. You couldn't have children. So you got to be safe. And so society now generally, unfortunately, makes us constantly feel unsafe. And in fact, the way that social media sells to us is mainly through terror or fear. If you don't have this, you won't be as good as everybody else, or you need this to make you a better lover. And if you don't, so they're all based on a pain principle. A fear principle, from which you become agitated. Your brain goes into a state where it's like, well, I need this, I must want this, and everybody else is doing better than I am. Oh, and by the way, you can't be good enough fast enough, and you can't accumulate enough wealth. And by the way, it's all vulnerable. So that's the state that all of us are in now as a culture. So really, we don't realize it. We're going along in a constant low-level stress response, and your body will put up with that for a while. We know that from studies done in, for example, the comparison between the Vietnam War and the Second World War. Weirdly, the Vietnam War was far more stressful on the young hearts of 19-year-olds. They came back with hearts of 50-year-olds because they were under fire all the time, and they didn't know who their enemy were because they weren't wearing uniforms. Whereas the Second World War, which was longer and technically nastier, but they would go through battle, and then they weren't killed. They'd get plenty of rest and recuperation. So they'd go through these fits and spurts of stress, which the body can cope with, but it needed recovery. The problem is now we are never off the stimulus that comes from our society to tell us that we should be worried, fearful, or anxious. And the problem is your body will do that for a while, and then eventually it drops off a cliff. And usually that's in the form of inflammation. Because at the heart of all of this is something I called in my book. It's called, I didn't phrase it, we now know it to be a system. It's three systems that link together. We call it the psycho-neuro-immunological pathway. Psycho, because initially it's the way that you appreciate the world. So you appreciate how you see reality. Is it a threat to me? What have I got to worry about? You then turn that into a neurological reaction. Okay, your nervous system says, right, do I need to run? Do I need to fly? Do I need to cuddle, love? What do I need to do? So it's a motor response. But it also produces an immune response. Because if you were going to going back to the saber-toothed tiger on the plains, if you were going to get eaten, you got chased, let's say, you had to think about the fact that you didn't get eaten, but you got bitten, or you got hurt, or in the fight that you had to have, you were bruised, damaged, or you broke a bone. So the amazing thing about the brain is once it perceives stress as a threat, it will produce all of the molecules that you need in order to heal. And I sort of proved this working at the hedge fund where I worked at, where we could stress the poor traders with a particular market. They could look at it. And as they became stressed, we took their hormones. We took cortisol, which is their stress hormone. And amazingly, I discovered that it exactly matched the fluctuations in the market. So as the markets went up, their cortisol went up. As the market went down, it went down again. It was correlated exactly. But far more interestingly, when I looked into their bloodstreams... You
mean as volatility went up?
Yeah, so as the markets dropped and fell, and it stressed the traders, they produced a hormonal response in the form of cortisol, which we all know is our stress hormone.
Yeah.
They just didn't know, because when I asked them their mood scores, how do you feel? I said, are you stressed? They go, well, no, I feel fine. I can handle stress. Hey, it bounces off me. Well, that's funny because your hormones are telling me otherwise. And we know that when you go into that hormonal response, it will produce neuropsychological responses. They become risk averse. They pull out of the market. They don't know they're doing it. They literally won't take a bet. So they see the opportunity, but they won't get into the game. And we see this in sportsmen. When they lose their performance, their testosterone gets blocked by their cortisol. So when they were winning, they love it and they're on it and they're fighting harder and they love the win. But then of course they overtrain and then they collapse. Collapse is disastrous, and their brain perceives that as, oh my God, I'm not winning anymore. Cortisol kicks in and artificially keeps it there. So they go into this very prolonged doldrum of underperformance.
So cortisol kicks in the sympathetic nervous system, which then makes you risk averse.
So you perceive the world, you decide internally, is it a threat to me? What should the suitable response be? You turn that into a neurological response, which might be fight my opponent or run from my aggressor in the old days. Now it's, I've just lost money on the market. I'd like to get up and punch somebody's face in, but I can't because it's not appropriate. So internally they're sort of combusting. But more importantly, and this was the spooky bit, is that when I noticed there was a particular molecule called interleukin 1b.
Yes.
Right? And this is a nasty little cytokine. Exactly. Yeah. So when they said to me, what does this mean, Nick? I said, guys, your immune system is matching the market. And they couldn't believe it. I said, your immune system is playing the game. So if you go down the pathway of what that little inflammatory marker does, it's a pro-tumor marker. So what it does is it codes for growth in the body, of particular cells. So this goes back to when you were injured. If you ran away from the saber-toothed tiger and he bit you, you needed to have ready internally all the molecules you needed for healing. So inflammation isn't our enemy. We're just looking at it in the wrong way. It's just that we don't need the system to be working all the time.
Yes. And so I'm going to translate this amazingly fascinating,
it's very
intense.
Complex.
So basically, when we have cortisol going up, our parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest, digest, produce, shuts down.
Absolutely.
So these people will have a lower libido, for example, less testosterone produced. And our sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, higher cortisol levels, sharper eyesight, sharper sense of smell, sharper senses.
All the things you need for an aggressor, exactly.
Correct, will kick in. The problem when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and the parasympathetic nervous system shuts down is our digestive system shuts down.
Yeah, exactly.
Where 70% of our immune system cells, gut-associated lymphoid tissue, sit. And as a response to that, it affects our immunity. Hence, the interleukin cell being modified.
And don't forget, these little molecules are clever. They're little master messengers. They go everywhere. They're in your bloodstream. And we know, as you know well, we have all the same receptors in our bowel as we do in our brain. And they use the same chemicals.
That's
so
right.
we knew very quickly that the brain and the stomach were talking. But the reason is, and I think this is where I think we're going to see that the situation changes with science. I personally don't believe that the gut biome dictates what your brain does. I think it's the other way around. And I think that it's a beautiful little synergy between the two. I think if you think about it, when you're stressed, rather like when you're pregnant, we know that women who get morning sickness, it's there for a reason. It's to stop you trying new foods, that it could be toxic to you. And even Ocado knows this. Their AI algorithms know when pregnant ladies are shopping and they don't know they're pregnant, they will tell you before you do, because you'll start buying different things without realizing it. I mean, it's that spooky. That's how well these
AI
is. It's AI, yeah. So, but the principle is that if you are going to go into this state, it will change it naturally changes what you want to eat. So I'm certain, say, if I'm stressed, I definitely start looking for sugar. I look for carbs, the quick little, chalky bit, something that I know will just give me instant gratification.
Because that increases insulin, which is a precursor to serotonin.
Because the brain, cortisol is telling the pancreas to produce sugar because it's a call to action. Because if you're going to have to fight or run,
you need to release sugar.
Exactly.
In your
That's
bloodstream.
that simple. So when you look at particularly in men, you tend to see this. You see it in women too, but it's particularly men, is when you see central obesity, as we call it. So what we call unfairly in the medical profession, the apples on sticks, the guys who have the big bellies but skinny legs and skinny arms, they are the most dangerous to themselves because that fat inside their abdomens is what will kill them quicker than anything else, and it's purely a cortisol response. And what's so fascinating is when you get behind men like that who come to see you, I asked them, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about why have you been under stress for so long? And it could just be a very stressful business. It could be a very stressful life. It could have been a very stressful childhood. But it's extraordinary how reliable it is. And that fat inside the abdomen causes more inflammation in the bowel, but it also causes the more sugar you take in, it goes to your liver. And that is what we're seeing, more people, young people with fatty livers than we've ever seen before.
Yeah. And that links, to so
100%.
Many diseases.
But to be fair, we've also got to say, well, why do they want the sugar? It is an addictive substance, but I think rather like alcohol. The difference between alcohol and sugar is one molecule. And of course, all that's happened is alcohol is sugar. It's just that it's already been partly glycolized by yeast. So it's one step further down the line, but you should see them as the same molecule. So in the same way that an alcoholic gets a fatty liver, so does somebody who eats too much sugar. It's exactly the same.
That's correct.
And it's terrifying because we're seeing kids in the States going for liver transplants that at the age of 12, 13, purely from drinking sweet drinks. It's that serious.
Yes. And on sweet drinks, a very quick one. I'm someone who, on the platform, we have foodless and it's a traffic light system and nothing is off limits because I'm a big believer that you shouldn't stop anything 100%, otherwise you lose the gut bacteria to digest it, except sweet drinks. Because they spike your blood sugar levels so quickly with a lack of fiber in it. And obviously the worst being, soft drinks. Those have been linked to obesity. And actually, I remember reading a study over 10 years ago talking about the fact that some people, they took example of obese children in the US who were having all these sugary drinks to the point where their body didn't know how to tap into fat stores anymore, even when they stopped having sugar.
It's like a metabolic syndrome.
Yes. So their body will only go into the blood looking for sugar in the blood, and they can't lose weight anymore.
And the awful thing is, I'm afraid I hate to tell you that diet drinks are just as bad, because it's what sets it off. Again, this is a good example of the psychoneurodynamic, is that when you put anything sweet, aspartame, sorbitol, whatever, on your tongue, it stimulates the same brain receptors as the sugar does. So although it's not sugar, it still tells your little pancreatic cells down waiting there to mobilize themselves, oh my God, sugar's coming.
Interesting.
So you still fire and send all the sugar into your bloodstream and ultimately stored as fat. So if you take as an example, generally 2 Diet Coca-Colas are the same as 1 Coke, but they're still half more bad, as it were, than you need in your life. And this is the trouble. And I see a lot of patients who think that, of course, they're drinking more healthily.
Really?
I think we were talking earlier as well about the Novo, I think it's called the Novo Index, which has just come out. It's a very simple thing to do. It's more about processing of food. And this is wrapped up in, so if you take an apple, for example, apple on its own, index level 1, fine. We're all happy with that because there's plenty of cellulose in it. There's lots of fiber and you get the sugar that you need. 2, sliced apple, still fine because you haven't munched it up enough that you're not getting the cellulose. 3 and 4, 3 would be apple sauce with your lamb. Okay. Trouble is now it has no cellular content in it at all. So there's no roughage. There's nothing that's really doing any good. And really, it's now just pure sugar.
But it's okay because you're having the lamb on the side. But on its own, not so good.
And then, of course, level 4 is the worst of all. And they're the ones we have to be careful. That's the one that's turned into apple crumble. It's the one that's in all the processed foods that you get out of the freezer. And as soon as it becomes processed, that can be as good an indicator as to whether it's good for you. So just ask yourself, at what stage is the food that I'm eating it? How processed is it? Even just something like ham. Is it now in square chunks in the fridge? Alarm bells go up. Full of salt, been reconstituted, probably got some sugar in it. If it's pure cut straight from the haunch of a lovely, fresh gammon, then fine. So I think if you grade yourself, just stop and ask yourself, how far down the processing line has this gone? Then I know that by the time I get to kind of Novo Index 2 or 3, I'm eating stuff that you can no longer call food.
I'm so happy you're saying this because I often get questions like, oh, Yalda, can I have wheat on the lifestyle? Can I have chickpeas on the lifestyle? And I always say the truth lies in shades of gray. It's not black or white. Yeah. If you take white bread from the supermarket or burger bun from McDonald's or even from off the shelf, that's white and processed with milk powder, not great. If you're having a slice of sourdough bread where you only have 3 ingredients, wheat, salt, water, and packed with probiotics, lower GI, much better for you.
Absolutely.
So it's not, for so many people who listen, they want to know, can I have this? Can I have dairy or can I not have dairy? Well, it depends. Processed cheese is not the same as cheese made from raw milk. Sheep cheese in a traditional fromagerie is not the same as Babybel.
No, exactly.
It's not the same product.
It's been reduced to nothing valuable.
Correct. So, Nick, we started talking about women and now we're talking about everyone. So let's quickly cover a topic which I'm fascinated about, which is the placebo effect.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how we're going to give hacks to our listeners for women who experience pain and to men or anyone who has pain, how to use the placebo effect to improve their well-being.
I have for years been fascinated by placebo. I did a large section on it in my book simply because we were always told at medical schools you're not allowed to lose placebo, which to me seemed ridiculous because the idea was if you were duping the patient into using something with a chalk pill, for example, and telling them it was going to take a headache away, that was unethical and we couldn't use it. And then one day, a marvelous chap called Professor Kapchuk in California did something brilliant, which is that he actually did some research where he gave people chalk pills, but he told them that it was placebo. So he removed the ethical problem, and they still got better, which is extraordinary. But placebo is very simply explained as it's a belief mechanism. So do I treat with placebo? 100%. And unashamedly do I use placebo every day because it's about being professional. It's the moment the patient arrives at my clinic door. You know, I'm lucky to work in a hospital, so it looks professional, but it's not too scary. Everybody's clean and healthy, and they arrive and they say, "Hello, Mr. Jones, and how can I help you?" And then already your brain's making a decision without even realizing it, that basically I'm here to get better. These guys probably know what they're talking about. They seem professional. You know, each as they move through my clinic, they're making a greater and greater subconscious decision that, hey, I'm opening myself up to be healed because I trust these people. As I told my kids the other day, it takes 0.6 of a millisecond for the human brain to make a decision about trustworthiness. I think that's a fascinating statistic. So whether you like it or not, impressions do matter. So being professional, etc., really matters. And I teach that to my students because I said to them, look, you can come in a T-shirt and jeans and play the whole kind of I'm Mr. Relaxed Schmoozy, but actually they want to see a degree of professionalism because they want to know this guy takes me seriously. So he dresses right. He has a shave in the morning. It's all that sort of stuff. But then when they come in, it's listening to them, hearing the story. You know, again, he's hearing my story. He's getting me. He understands where I'm coming from. So immediately going back to that psychoneuroimmunological process, here is somebody making a decision that the place they're now in is trustworthy, that these guys know what they're talking about. I trust what he says. I trust the way he carries himself, what he does. This guy could cure me. I have just gained 30 to 50% gain on the treatment, and I haven't even touched them yet.
Okay, so just for people to understand this, the placebo effect accounts for 30 to 50%.
Yeah, it can be that big.
Of the effects of any medication. And today we know why. There have been numerous studies on neuroplasticity. If you are sick and you think you're going to stay sick, your chances of staying sick are much higher. If you are ill, but you can see the end of the tunnel, your brain will produce the cells to heal you.
Absolutely.
So what was dismissed in the past as the placebo effect, today we know is a really, really powerful tool.
Absolutely. And by the way, drug companies know this because that's why they got, I think it was Damien Hirst who did the first sort of pictures of, tablets and different things. And the reason was because drug companies know that if you want to make a painkiller more effective, you simply make it a white tablet. If you want to make an anti-inflammatory, they're pink, yellow, or orange. If they're antibiotics, you put them in a capsule and you make them black and green. Seriously, it's that simple. They can highly correlate the color of a tablet with what the outcome they want to do because they can just give you chalk and make it a color and see what happens. Oh, that's interesting. When they get pink tablets, they get a better effect. So drug companies themselves use this. They just don't tell you that. They want you to think it's all about the drug. So, don't underestimate the medicine chest that you have inside you that you can mobilize. And it's fundamentally important. And of course, at the heart of this is all the traditional medicines. I think for the first time in certainly 7 years that I've been practicing, we've actually seen some of the alternative therapies utterly proven.
Yeah.
They used to be thrown on the dump as charlatans, and they don't like the word holism. That's why functional doctors now call themselves functional doctors, because they don't want to use the word holism because it's associated with la-la beads and, wooden sandals. And I think it's very sad that that's been dumped. We should be appreciating that the ancients knew it a long time before we did. And the awful truth is that for chronic diseases, most of them inflammatory, we are not curing them. And we need to be very clear about this. We're giving people at best symptomatic relief.
That's right.
So we need to rethink the whole way we look at medicine. And the first one is to say, why don't we let the patient have at least a good chance of healing themselves? So don't fear your inflammation, understand it. It's your friend, really. It's just it's being activated inappropriately at a time that you don't need. So maybe say, why is my ulcerative colitis, why is it suddenly flared up today? Well, the most likelihood is you're stressed. Why am I stressed? It's very often emotional stress. So don't look for work stress. Look for something that's happening at home, for your family, husband, children, something that is emotionally disturbing you, because that will inflame it very quickly. And ask yourself, and that's the thing you've got to remove, not necessarily the food. But if you've also been out partying, you've had too many late nights, too much acid, too much sugar, etc., yeah, that's probably what it is. And poor sleep. Get your sleep back in action. Just return yourself to a state of rest, and so will your nervous system. It really is that simple. I just don't think people believe it.
Yeah, I'm smiling because all my subscribers on the platform are going to be loving what you're saying. I'm often asked by journalists, which food shall we focus on to get better? And I frankly can say that I hate those questions because I never got better just with foods. It was improving the way I ate and improving my mental wellness, stopping some emotional stresses in my life, doing the right kind of movement to kick in endorphins and then production of all the right neurotransmitters, and positive thinking because of the neuroplasticity effect that we're discussing right now.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing we're all looking for most of the time is another little drug called dopamine, which I'm sure you've discussed before. And dopamine's short-acting. It gives us very little but it's gratification. So, of course, food, again, is wrapped around, why do I want my chocolate bar? Why am I getting myself a treat? Treat just means I feel sad about something, low about, so I need to reward myself. Why do I need to reward? The reason there are so many coffee shops in London is because stimulants gratify dopamine. The reason the like button on your Instagram tablet, which we're all hunting for, we all want to be appreciated, but it's the equivalent of 2 cigarettes or 2 cups of coffee. That's literally what happens in the brain. The problem is when you don't get liked, that's the worry. That's what blocks your serotonin. Because serotonin tells you where you are in the hierarchy. It tells you that's all it was designed to do, was to tell you where am I in comparison to everything else. And bearing in mind that Instagram is inhabited by ladies by 87%, they're going to be very, very susceptible to it. So just be really careful. Choose who you listen to very, very carefully. Don't get sucked down a rabbit hole of rubbish. That's why influencers like you who are doing really sensible informatory stuff, and that's why you're getting followed so well, is because you're putting out their really good stuff that people trust, and they've obviously tried it and they've found it works. And we need to separate it from the rubbish, and that we are just as susceptible. The like button was responsible for a 3-fold increase in self-harming, obesity, depression, and anxiety in women in less than 3 months. Wow. In 2014, because the moment that you could be judged for what you posted, that's the difference. You could post without anybody coming back to you. Once you could be judged one way or the other for what you put up, that was what caused it. And it made people become introspective, stressed, anxious, and then of course all of your inflammation went up, literally.
So that ties up to one of the points you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast of women being physically weaker than men ancestrally, and having babies needed protection, so they needed to be well regarded, so opinion of others matter more to us than they do to men, and that's another cause for us feeling more pain.
I agree. I don't like, not to correct you, but I think it's important not to put out there we're saying women are weaker than men. They're just really different, because the roles that we were given psychoneurobiologically years ago have not gone just because we've had 100 years of society. We think we've superseded it. We somehow consciously, because we've become terribly clever and we can build computers. We know that the modules I referred to earlier, of which there are 6, that we were born with, and they're still being born with, still drive us fundamentally because they had to. And it was passed down through eons and generations of processing, of staying alive. And you inherited those modules that kept you alive. So the difference is it doesn't just go because we want women empowerment, etc. They're still fundamentally driven by the same things. And once you understand that and what's doing it, it empowers you to do something about it. Just know yourself really well. Don't assume it's being somebody that's put upon you, that it's about hierarchies, it's about power, it's about anything. It's just simply about your biology interacting with the world. Stress isn't a thing. Stress is a response. And it's how you see the world that sets that response.
It's very true. Stress is completely subjective.
Totally.
And in fact, people often ask me if I was really stressed when working on the financial markets. As far as I was concerned, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. I never saw it as a stressful thing. But I love what you're just saying about the difference between men and women. It's reminding me of a conversation between my children when they were much younger. My son, JJ, who's a bit naughty, looked at me. He was 8. And he said to me, "Mommy, how come you go to the gym so much and Daddy is still stronger than you are?"
Yeah.
And my son William replied to him, because she's from the human species, and women, although smaller, are far more intelligent than men.
They just use different tricks. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But I think also the nice thing that I think a lot of the anthropological evidence is showing is that also females, whether you want to call, or I think females as well, impersonal, women generally were also the storytellers. So in the old days, when they were caring and they were together and grouped for safety, they were also the purveyors of not only information and how to do things. So you had the grandmothers teaching those processes, but they were also the purveyors of story and information. And that was very important on the children, because don't forget, even the boys, when they were little, would be with their mothers and they would hand down the myths, the legends. And that's why if you look at all cultures across the world, who we know are intrinsically completely disconnected, you find the same stories, the same cultures, the same dragons, the same symbols coming through in their history. So to say that they're all just socioculturally induced just isn't true. It was something that we as humans learned through growing very big brains in order to be able to cogitate in a different way. The moment we could draw on, cave paintings, we realized that we could see the world in a different way. We could manifest ourselves. And that was a huge, huge discovery. And that was often women just as much as men. But the great thing is, and I think this is at the heart of why women share with each other much more, and us men don't, we're just less good at it, is because it's ingrained in them to do it.
Fascinating.
So I think it's about story, it's about sharing love and information and symbolization, all those sorts of things. And it's sad, in my view, if we lose that. It's a very powerful thing that's kept us safe for millions of years. And I think that it just manifests in different ways, and we need to use it in different ways.
So just to conclude, the brain wants to feel safe.
100%.
The stories we tell ourselves in our heads can be our healers or the demise of us. Yeah. So would you give as a tip to all our listeners to visualize a happy, healthy body, well-functioning, no fear?
I would. I think visualization is very good, particularly actually for healing. It's amazing. There's a lot of evidence that if you actually visualize, so if you've got a wound, etc., you visualize through meditation and breathing that you can heal it and you see it improving. There's certainly evidence that works. I think the first thing I say to patients is, look, when the anxiety kicks in, whether it's everybody hates me, I haven't got any friends, what is it? You go down that rabbit hole. Just stop for a minute. And also, by the way, you're feeding it through your Instagram or your social media, etc. Is kind of you think is reinforcing that because everyone's having a better time than I am and my life's rubbish. Mm-hmm. What you actually want to say is actually stop a minute. What in my real life is there any contextual experience I've had that reinforces what I'm thinking is true? Actually, I've got nice kids. I'm not doing too badly. So this is the idea behind having grateful thoughts. Actually, before you go down a rabbit hole of what you haven't got, what you can't do, say to yourself, wait a minute, let's just thank myself for certain things. And suddenly it's amazing how the other thoughts just go away. You just flip them. It's reframing.
So a gratefulness prayer as soon as you feel anxiety.
Gratefulness prayer and just stop a minute. Whoa. Okay. And I have what I call the 3 breath principle. And is literally just take 3 long, deep diaphragm breaths. Right? Because by definition, if you're hyperventilating because of your anxiety, you can't think straight. You will not be thinking rationally. Your forebrain is shut down. So don't think yourself out of it, breathe yourself out of it. Literally just 3 breaths. SAS are told to do it. Surgeons are told to do it. I was told to do it when I arrived at the scene of an accident. What do? And we'd all go, do this, no, do this, no, do this, no. 3 breaths. Because in the time that you've taken those breaths, nobody's going to get worse off. But you might just not kill them because you'll make the right decision instead of the wrong one. So these are always he takes my breath away. It's at the heart of all our language. But just breathe when that moment comes on you, because if you don't and you keep letting it happen, all of the inflammation you suffer with will just ramp up.
So I think that's probably the best takeaway from this podcast. 3 breaths.
3 deep breaths principle, yeah. When everything about you is going AWOL, just take 3 breaths. And it's amazing, suddenly things just get clearer. 5's even better if you've got time. But do it at the car steering wheel, do it anywhere. When everything about you is going mad, just breathe.
This is amazing. Thank you so much, Nick.
My pleasure.
And, you've just to wrap up, I want to say what went through my head throughout this podcast is things that I've used with my children when they were small. So whenever they'd hurt themselves, even really badly, I would tell them that it was fine and I would kiss it better and instantly they felt better. So this is what you're describing.
So that is placebo in its own right.
Placebo. And the other thing is whenever they, especially children when they're quite young and they can't express themselves and they get angry because they can't express themselves, I would point my finger out and I would say, this is a candle, just blow the candle.
Yeah.
I would make them blow the candle and they would instantly calm down. And really what works with us as children works with us as adults because we're the same physiological beings.
Yeah. And that, of course, is like distraction too. By making them think about blowing a candle out, you've taken their mind off the thing that's hurting them. It's exactly the same as when you rub something you've just banged on a wall. When you rub, you cause so much more stimulation to the nervous system that it pays attention to that instead of dwelling on the thing you've just done. So that's all, and you've probably seen it with your own children again. When they fall over, they will look at you.
Yes.
They look at you for the response. And if you go, oh my God, darling, listen, actually, then immediately they cry. It's a crisis. Everything goes bad. Equally, if you pay them no attention at all, they're going to cry because they want your attention. You need to give it to them. The happy medium is rush over to them, quickly check their hands, dust them down, and then distract them. Oh, look at that duck over there.
So we can do the same with ourselves.
100%.
We go into a panic, we give ourselves attention, and we look at all the beautiful things in our lives. And we'll remember to breathe 3 times.
And 3 breaths first.
Nick, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.
It was fascinating. I can't wait to have you on the podcast again.
Thank you.
To everyone listening, please share this podcast with your friends. Make sure to subscribe, to rate us. And you can find Nick on, I will leave all his details for his practice in the description box. And he's also on Instagram. I will be tagging him. Thank you so much, Nick, for
pleasure.
today.
Thank you for having me.
And Nick's book, The Meaning of Pain, is linked on my page, Yalda Loves, on eatburnsleep.com. And is also available, I believe, in many languages, right?
Yeah, I'm amazed. It's in 5 languages now. It's in Italian, Polish, Russian, Thai, and I think I've said them all, French. I think that's it. Yep.
Okay, so you can look it up. Nick Potter, The Meaning of Pain. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this uplifting recovery story. It is quite amazing how the power of the mind is so decisive when it comes to health. But the power of making the right choices is very important as well. So with that in mind, I've created a cancer recovery section, which is now part of the specialized advice section, included in the premium membership of the Eat, Burn, Sleep platform. If you are a member, I advise you to go and have a read. It's very educative. It is important to understand how cancer works for prevention purposes. And if you are going yourself through cancer, I advise you as well to go and check it out. I give you nutrition advice, mental wellness advice, lifestyle advice, as well as supplements advice to support you best through this difficult time. Keep smiling, keep healthy, and thank you so much for listening.